I want to talk for a few minutes about how we utilize what we call mini church, or what I would today call a micro church inside of a church, as opposed to a micro church that's a church plant. But how we use mini church to develop leaders who would eventually become church planters. But as I get into this, there's kind of a bigger picture. And I want to start with three questions that Peter Drucker asked that basically kind of set us up for the whole seeker driven movement. And the questions are: who is the customer? What is the customer value? What's the best delivery system for what the customer values? Now, assuming that the customer is somebody who's got a spiritual vacancy in their life, they're hungry for Jesus and they just don't quite know it yet. Well, then if that's our customer, what is that customer value? Well, they want a good life for their family. They want to prosper financially. They want the kids to turn out well. And what's the best system for delivering that, which turns out to be a bunch of church programs. And the church programs, as we think of them, tend to be silos. You've got a youth ministry over here, you got music things going on over here, you got things for divorce care over here, you're doing something for addicts over here, and boom, 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 you've got silos everywhere, and there's no vertical integration. Now, what do I mean by vertical integration? Well, think about Apple. They conceptualize a product, they then design a product, they control the manufacturer of that product, then they skip the wholesaler and they retail that product. That's vertical integration. And so we were thinking along those lines before we ever heard those terms. But what really got us going comes back to Drucker's three questions: who's the customer? What's the customer value? And what's the best delivery system? Well, if the customer is no longer the seeker, but it's God Himself, then what is the customer value? His reconciliation of His creation that's lost its way to Himself. And what is the best delivery system? Well, we're given the delivery system in Matthew chapter 28. It's to go and make disciples and teach them everything that Jesus taught to us. And so we, without hearing these fancy terms, begin to just kind of rethink the church. It was the hippie days. It was easy to just not want to do tradition and want to do something, different, and to look at what we saw as institutionalism that didn't work very well, and look in the Word and go, how can we align ourselves to the Word? So we really kind of built our churches around Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13, that we saw that the leaders in the church are there to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. We would insert in there Ephesians chapter 2:10, that you're God's masterpiece, you're created unto good works, that you should walk in them. And so we think everybody in the church, every member a missionary, every member a minister, those kinds of terms were really a big deal to us. We like the term friendship evangelism. We're discipling people into Christ. The book that I wrote for Exponential called Equipping Everyday Missionaries in Post-Christian Era really feeds into our whole concept of discipling people into Christ. And then as we look for a model for church, we saw it in Acts chapter 2. And we looked at what we did on the weekend as the temple in terms of Acts chapter 2, and what we did in houses and automotive garages and parks and food courts and all of that, what we called mini church, as equivalent to what they were doing gathered together in the houses. And so as we begin to align to mission, without, again, knowing the terms that I'm using today, we're just kind of finding our way. The cornerstone of what we did was this relationship between what went on the weekend and then what went on in the middle of the week. So the temple versus the house and the ministry as they interacted. Now, here's the huge benefit that we had. And I don't probably, when I gloss over things and I make them sound a little simpler than they really are. But the huge benefit, a very simple benefit, is that you're asking people three questions about what they heard on the weekend. What did the Holy Spirit say to you while somebody else was talking? Not what did the Bible say? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? Which are good questions. But what did the Spirit speak to you while somebody was talking? Second question is that um, what are you going to do because of what the Spirit said to you? So we're teaching people to listen to God. We're teaching people to obey God. They're declaring what they're going to do, telling their friends, so they probably are going to follow through and do it. And then the last question was, how can we help you along your journey? The thing that God has called you to do, how can we pitch in and help? And to our great surprise, we begin to see spiritual gifts emerge. Now, this goes all the way back to we started doing this in 1976 and have been doing it ever since. And what would naturally happen is we had an apprentice program. We didn't quite use those words. We called the leader of the mini church a pastor, and we called the apprentices under shepherds. And we would try to develop where you had at least two under shepherds in a small group, maybe 12 to 15 people, but there's two people being apprenticed to do what you're doing. And then you hand off to one of them and go and take a couple people from the group, go start a new group. If the person you hand it off to does the same thing 3 times, then we would come to that person and we would see pastoral and church planting potential in them. And we just simply ask them one question. Would you pray about the possibility of planting a church? If they said yes, then a lot of other things happened. It wasn't as simple as I sometimes make it. We were pretty involved in training people. But if you said no, then we just left it there. We're not going to bother you. We're not going to bend somebody's arm. We want to multiply churches, but we're not going to get in the flesh. We're going to try and walk in the Spirit and do this thing. And so I think the vertical integration, and some of this loops back on itself, but the vertical integration between friendship evangelism, which is really follow me as I follow Christ, or follow me into Christ. I'm discipling people who don't know Jesus yet, and they don't know I'm discipling them. But as I'm bringing up things in my life that are God things, spiritual moments, and looking always, we're training our people from the pulpit. We're training people, look for the opportunity to pray with your friend. Look for them to complain about something and get the chance. As soon as you pray with them, things change. And we would tell people, if you're shy and you're not going to pray with them on the spot, just tell them that you want permission before you go to bed tonight. You pray every night. Can I pray for you at that point? And so you work your way into spiritual relationship with this person. It results in people coming to Christ. So what we're seeing is Acts chapter 2, that they had favor with the neighbors, and God was adding to the number daily such as should be saved. I can remember when we finally got to the point where there were at least 7 people a week coming to Christ. We were so thrilled because we felt like we're matching that scripture. But we're trying to put this all on the people. You know, we use these slogans that every member a missionary, priesthood of all believers, but they're just slogans for most people. And so as we get into this again, the keystone was what we did in mini church, because we're developing ministers, people who are capable of ministering to each other. That's what goes on in mini church. We get together and eat for half an hour. Leftovers is what we're looking for. And during that time, people are asking questions. Hey, I prayed for you last week, or hey, I tried to help you with whatever you were doing last week. How did it all turn out? And it's what, I grew up in a church setting where we had testimony time in our midweek prayer meeting. That's really what this becomes, is testimony time, as people are sharing the results of other people ministering in their lives. And that's a really, really powerful time. And then we would just go into a situation where we'd go, I'll start because I'm the leader. Here's 2 words that I remember from the Sunday message. And by the way, as a pastor, sometimes that was hard. So people ended up just taking notes almost without being asked. And we just go around the ring. And if somebody wants to kind of preach the message all over, we stop them. We'll give you 5 words, but we really want 2. And so what we're trying to do is just get that in their memory, refresh their memory. And then we're going to ask the 3 questions. And I'll answer first as a leader, and we just go around the room. And what I'm doing now is I'm trading off with my apprentices. So they're learning to do this very simple thing. In the Jesus Revolution, we were doing 1 million home Bible studies, not really, but there were more people going to home Bible studies than coming to our church on Sunday. I was doing one in a munitions factory, and had to get through a picket line of anti-Vietnam War demonstrators. It was a crazy, wonderful, wonderful, God-driven time. But this meant that the plumber has to come home from work or the architect has to come home from work and prepare a little sermon to do in the middle of the week. We took all that away with mini church because all you're doing is discussing what was said on the weekend. So made it a lot easier, lowered the threshold into ministry for these people. But in the mini church, we're teaching the saints of God to minister to each other. We are equipping them because they're getting comfortable talking about God. They're getting comfortable praying out loud, pray with other people. We're equipping them to become everyday missionaries into the little oikos, the little household extended group that they live in, where they live, eat, work, play, whatever. We're equipping some people to become church multipliers. And as we're thinking about being church multipliers, our first generation of all this is going to be local. And we would hive off large numbers of our congregation. 4 different times, 20% have walked out the door on one Sunday. One time we sent 25% to 2 churches that we planted. Was kind of normal for us to send out of a church of 1,500, we got up to 2,000 plus, but we would send out 150, 160 people at a time. And that's really what we were looking for. We weren't trying to be mega churches, although some became mega church, and we weren't trying to do micro church. We barely even scratched that. We were always looking for that mid-sized church. But what we wanted to see was you be successful in that mid-sized church, the leadership that we had raised up. If you could do that well, then we could think about you going overseas. And for us in Hawaii, especially, overseas might be Maui. But it certainly was Japan or Thailand or the Philippines, or it would be the U.S. mainland. But there's a lot of greater risk to the planter. There's a lot greater risk to the mother church because you're putting a lot more investment in it. But again, the key was this vertical integration. So the loop back works this way, that let's just assume we start with church. So sitting in church, you're hearing the Sunday message. You're being taught how to share your faith. You're being taught the scripture. We're chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Keep it light, keep it funny, but that's what we're doing. So you're getting a Bible education. You really know what you're talking about. Getting a lot of apologetics coming across the pulpit. And so now you're in the mini church and you're being asked, what did the Spirit say to you? What are you going to do as a result of it? How can we come alongside and partner with you in what you're doing? And so now we're equipping people to become ministers to each other in the church. And this is also where we would get our volunteer base from these people. But we're equipping people now to be missionaries. And as we're equipping them to be missionaries, it loops back. Because as they're reaching out into their oikos with friendship evangelism, then it's feeding into this whole process. And they're just going to naturally bring their friend with them. We would always pray at the end of a church service, do you want to invite Christ into your life? But I'd always make this little disclaimer. I assume if you're going to pray with me, even if you showed up to listen to me talk, you already accepted Christ in your heart. You've come to that conclusion. I'm just going to help you kind of, mark it down with this little prayer. But then what I would usually say is, if you just prayed that prayer with me, there's somebody that you ought to tell this about this. Somebody who's been praying for you, they've been talking to you, whatever, they're your friend. You might just need to elbow them in the ribs right now, and that'll be the signal. Hey, I just prayed with that guy. Or maybe you need to go call him. But whatever you do within 24 hours, we'll let them know what's going on. So what we're doing now is we're kind of putting it back on the person who brought that person to faith. Now, you ask that person, well, what do I do next? I just prayed with that guy. What do I do next? Now we're putting it again on the everyday missionaries to do the work of an evangelist, but to further the disciple making process and take that person further into our church. And usually the first place that meant to go is come to mini church with me. And so hope I've done a good job of this, but this is how it all worked for us. And it worked very well. There's a lot of churches out there that got planted. And what is really important to me is that what we would call an exponential level 5 church is the guys who went out to plant churches carried the DNA with them. They could take what they had picked up and pass it on to somebody who could pass it on to somebody who could pass it on to somebody. But again, the heart and soul of this is this vertical integration between disciple making evangelism, bring them to wherever you're at in church, mini church, but then this vertical integration between the message that's taught on the weekend and what you're being challenged with in the mini church, and then as you're pressing that outward into life. And what it did for us, just a little side benefit, is we had a lot less programs. We had a kind of a deal in our annual planning thing. We would try to kill one ministry a year, at least one ministry a year. And a lot of things that you would do in a program, marriage counseling, or even new believer classes, those kind of things are just get taken care of as people are in this highly interactive dialogue situation, and marriage problems come up, addictive problems come up. I don't know, I don't understand this about the Bible. That comes up. And as people are learning to minister to each other, the program load got lighter. We were able to move resources away from the kind of silos that we learned to run when we first started out, and put them into church multiplication. So we had dollars to spend, and it was a very good thing for us.